All right. Thank you all for being here tonight. I wanted to say that my name is Emily Kunlevong, and I'll be your moderator for the evening. I am a fourth-year MD PhD student at the University of North Carolina. And in the chat box, we have Carrie Davidson from Yale that will be helping us. And then we will also be having somebody live tweeting as well. Welcome to another one of APSA's interactive sessions for the 2024-2025 academic year. We are pleased to host tonight's session in collaboration with the Association of American Medical Colleges GREAT program with physicians to answer questions about PSTP programs. And so now I would like to have our panelists introduce themselves, your institution, a little bit about your work, and then I will go ahead and call on folks the way they show up on my screen. I have Dr. Adams Waldorf.
Yeah, sure. Great. I'm going to go ahead and, inspired by another panelist, I'm going to share my screen here. Wait a minute, wrong screen. Let me share the other one. Two things going on. Great. Okay, great. I'm Christina Adams Waldorf, and I am the R38 program director at the University of Washington. I have an MD only, but my CV looks like an MD PhD, and most people confuse me for that when I'm presenting at conferences and so forth. So I am an obstetrician gynecologist by training. There are very few of us that have gone down an MD PhD pathway. I wrote an R38 STAR program proposal to the NIH to start a physician scientist program for obstetrician gynecologists and pediatricians in Seattle. And so we have a University of Washington piece of it and a Seattle Children's piece of it. And we have 5 scientific kind of institutes that are participating in hosting our students. We just got another notice for JIT, so I think that our funding will actually come through now. It's still very new. We have interviewed our first batch of MD, PhD, and really could be MD applicants as well for the physician scientist program. We're still waiting for our notice of award, but we got a perfect score on that application, which was great. This program will be the first and only program that we're aware of in the country with an obstetrician gynecologist track. Of course, there are quite a few pediatrician physician scientist tracks. We're combining our programs, so our OBGYN physician scientists and our pediatric physician scientists will have a lot of overlap and connection. In our program, each scholar will spend 1 to 2 years in the program. And this, in the OBGYN side, that's added to the 4 years of residency. It becomes a 5-year program because our requirements for deliveries and surgical procedures is so great that we can't simply combine it in. But for the pediatricians, it is it stays within their 3-year residency. During the R38 year, just like it is as a physician scientist when you're out, you are in 80% research and 20% clinical. How that is actually administered really depends on your year. It could be a continuity clinic. It could be a day of jeopardy. It could be a day of covering a certain service. It just depends, but it will be capped at 20% clinical. And this is what it's like for your entire life. We were kind of surprised that some of the applicants were like, what, we don't get 100% research? No, you never will for the rest of your life. This is how it is. So it's just the same kind of in our program. And at any point, there is in our OBGYN side an R3, an R4, and an R5 that are on the R38 blocks. You'll get not only a lot of interaction across programs with the pediatricians, but also across years. We have more than 50 mentors to choose from that span basic clinical and translational sciences at UW, Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, Benaroya, and Seattle Children's Research Institute. And we are also adding mentors as needed. But for our program, the focus of the research needs to be in either infectious disease, immunology, immunotherapeutics, or autoimmunity, because our R38 grant comes from NIAID. but this isn't very difficult given our unmet needs. And so I think that that's probably a good place to end. We have a lot of other supplementary funds and perks of the program. And so if anyone's interested, please reach out to me. I'm easy to find with my email, and I'd love to take your questions.
Thank you so much. Next on my screen is Dr. Amala.
Hi, excuse me, I'm Chaz Amala. I'm an anesthesiologist at Columbia University in New York, and I oversee a physician scientist training program, also PI on a T32 training grant. And if I may, I'd like to share really an overview of PSTP programs in our specialty. I won't be talking specifically um, about the Columbia program, but it fits in here, I think, very well. So many people are often not aware of the diversity of topics that anesthesiology research covers, but it really spans many organ systems. Many people would assume that we're limited to neuroscience and brain science, but we're not in any way limited to that in our clinical practice. That goes from operating rooms to labor and delivery to intensive care units and pain clinics, and encompasses physiological homeostasis in many organ systems across a wide array of pathologies, across a wide variety of aid groups, and really spans basic clinical and epidemiology research, everything from cryo-electron microscopy structure protein interactions to epidemiology clinical outcomes of vast patient populations. So there's really a wide breadth of research opportunities in both clinical and basic sciences. These are some common themes in anesthesiology research. What jumps out at you does involve the nervous system, including a lot of research in pain, organ inflammation, organ injury, mechanisms of consciousness, and so forth. The traditional path of an anesthesiology residency is 4 years, beginning with a transitional internship year, and usually 3 years of clinical anesthesiology. Many trainees will then do a 1-year clinical fellowship in up to 6 accredited ACGME accredited clinical fellowships in ICU medicine, pain, cardiothoracic anesthesiology, pediatric anesthesiology, regional anesthesiology, and obstetrics. Alternatively, some of the research-oriented medical students will decide to concentrate more on research in this fellowship year, and many programs offer non-accredited fellowships in disciplines such as neuroanesthesia, transplant anesthesia, and critical care anesthesia, or even possibly straight research. These types of fellowships are eligible for up to 80% research support in many programs supported by T32s, which are NIH grants that are awarded to approximately 18 institutions nationally. Typically, individuals spend between 2 to 3 years on the training grant, and many in our specialty go on to benefit from a number of foundation awards, which are set up to be like mini NIH K08 awards. During this period of time, programs will mentor applicants to pursue their first NIH awards. This is actually an Excel sheet that's available on the AAMC PSTP website. It's been recently updated and lists some of the programs around the country, as well as contact individuals about their PSTP programs and whether they also have incorporated a T32 fellowship. But really around the country, lots of opportunities for PSTPs. Within our specialty I mentioned, we're very fortunate to have a number of foundations that give grants that also require protected research time. These are traditionally in the immediate early faculty years. The Foundation for Anesthesia Education and Research is sort of our flagship foundation, but there's many others, including pain societies, the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation, and various subspecialty societies such as obstetric anesthesiology, cardiovascular anesthesiology, and pediatrics. This is a graph of NIH funding over the last 15 or so years, and anesthesiology departments have seen a dramatic rise in NIH funding, particularly in the last 5 to 8 years, compared to a modest rise in the overall NIH budget. So this is my contact information. One of my favorite hobbies is interacting with medical students who are thinking about anesthesiology as a specialty, particularly those that are interested in research. And I'd be delighted to add my email to the chat in case you don't have a chance to copy it here. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next on the screen is Dr. Stone.
Hi, I need to unmute. Thanks for the invitation to come. I didn't present anything, but I'd like to introduce myself and then talk about our program. My name's Jennifer Stone. I'm a PhD trained individual who partners with clinician scientists or surgeon scientists in our department, otolaryngology, at the University of Washington to provide research training to residents in otolaryngology as well as to medical students. I'm currently the program director for an R25 research and education grant. We don't have a PSTP program in our surgical department here. I've heard that they're rare in surgery. I'm also the director of research for the department. We have a long history of training clinician scientists. We've had a T32 for 40 years, and we've just transitioned into this R25 research, education, and training program. The institute that has funded us, the NIDCD, the National Institutes on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders, has transitioned to this because it moves away from an NRSA program. So there's no payback agreement, which is great. And it also adds a really lovely educational element to the mentored research training that we've done for so long, including learning skills in grant writing. All of our residents in research will submit a grant, and that's been really fruitful. One thing that's unique about our program in the country, but certainly there are many wonderful programs in NIH-funded resident research training. One of the things that's unique about ours is that all 5 of our residents per year do the same research training all the way through. So they are a cohort that moves together, which is really great, builds a great system of support. We usually have about 1 MD PhD per year in our program. And every resident does about the same type of clinical to research training ratio that Christina mentioned, about 80 to 20%. So 80% research to 20% clinical for a total of 15 months. One other thing that's really great about the program is all of our faculty are engaged in research. Our residents can work with otolaryngologists, but they also have the opportunity to seek out mentorship through any of the other amazing departments that we have at the University of Washington, including computer sciences, bioengineering, neurosciences. So they have a rich set of opportunities to choose from, basic science, translational, and clinical. I'll just add one more thing, that is that the NIDCD, our institute, really is favoring clinician scientist training and has a lot of great funding opportunities for them. And our institute is offering for any residents in our program 1 year of K Award preparation training. If you want to do K08 or K23, you can stay with us and we can help you develop a research proposal for that. So I will turn it over from there. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing. Next, I see Dr. Gallagher.
Great. Thank you, Emily and Carrie, for the invitation to do this. And so I'm at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, and I oversee 2 programs that we have here that are of interest to physician scientists. One is the traditional ABIM research pathway, which is the pathway that most MD PhDs consider traditionally when they are applying for residency program, and that is essentially a pathway that has been around since the late 1990s, which is where you end up doing 2 years of internal medicine residency program instead of 3 years. So it shortens the internal medicine residency part of the program, but then is typically linked to a fellowship, and then there's research, 3 years of research at the other end of the fellowship program. You don't necessarily have to do a fellowship, but I would say most people who go into that pathway do the fellowship program. The second program that I now currently oversee is also an R38 program. So we at Mount Sinai have an R38 that is shared, actually 2 R38s that are shared between in the internal medicine department and the pediatrics department. And similar to what Christina mentioned earlier, it's 80% protected time for research. That's part of the program. It does extend your residency program from 3 years to 4 years. So it's a little bit different to the ABIM research pathway. But eventually, kind of if you add up the entire thing, it actually ends up being almost exactly the same duration of time. I would say most programs, not exclusive to us, but most programs in internal medicine, at least who have the R38, tend to use it for people who are MDs rather than MD PhDs, but maybe MDs who have an interest in research but just haven't had the opportunity to do a PhD, and that they that they essentially have the opportunity to explore whether they would like a research career during residency. And then they apply for a fellowship program at the beginning of PGY 4-year. We also do have an opportunity, though, for people who have done a PhD who want to change direction. So say you did a PhD in something that was very basic, and now you think you want to explore, say, like clinical trials or something like that, then the R38 would be potentially an opportunity for that. It is a little confusing. I will say that at the outset, we've rebranded this year because we used to call our ABIM research pathway the research track. But then when we introduced the R38 program, it became very murky as regards what the research track was. And so we have now kind of rebranded that the ABIM research pathway is the ABIM research pathway explicitly on our website, and the R38 is the STAR program, which is a separate track. But I would say if anybody is confused or interested in these things, not just with our institution, but at any other institution, you should definitely reach out to the program director to just kind of clarify exactly what research track is what. But the last thing I'll just say is that typically most institutions have separate match numbers for like NRMP numbers for ABIM research pathway versus a categorical pathway. Typically the R38 is an internal application. So people who are already in the program apply internally into the R38 program. And so again, it might be institution specific. So for people who are thinking of these pathways, they should just reach out if they have questions. I will also put my email in the chat, and do feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about internal medicine.
Thank you. Next, I see Dr. Daniel Moore.
Hi, I'm Dan Moore. I'm at Vanderbilt, where I'm a pediatric endocrinologist. I'm the director of the fellowship training program there and the director of the pediatric PSTP there. Nationally, I'm the chair of the National Pediatrician Scientist Collaborative Work Group, which is a collection of about 20 different PSTP programs from around the country that come together about once a month to talk about training and best practices and how to help everyone become a pediatrician scientist. So I'll advocate a little bit for Vanderbilt, but I'm just really excited that you might become excited about becoming a pediatrician. And so I'm happy to talk to you or connect you to other people around the country that would be happy to talk to you about being a pediatrician, because it's definitely the most optimal, best specialty that you can choose from. And it intersects with all the other programs, and adults are just big kids, right? So it's a great chance to do all that. At Vanderbilt, though, just to toot our own horn, we do have all the sort of additional accoutrements for your training. There's an R38 program there. We have a T30. We have multiple T32s for your fellowship training. We have a K-12 program for your early faculty training. We have a number of grant resources to try to help you advance your career through all those stages, and we'd be very excited to talk to you about any of that. We use multiple different training programs in pediatrics. So like medicine, there's an accelerated pathway that's 2 years of residency and 4 years of fellowship. There's also a program that's 3 years of residency with an automatic year out during the residency that you can use. You can also use that in conjunction with the R38. And then a lot of pediatric residents that go on to become scientists just do a standard residency and get more involved in the science at the fellowship level. So you don't have to become fully committed right out of the box. If you're a pediatrician, we're happy to help you develop along your pathway wherever you might be. So if you have questions about becoming a pediatrician scientist, I'd be happy to speak to those.
Thank you. And then I see Dr. Nick Moore.
The other Dr. Moore. Yeah, thank you. I'm Nick Moore from the University of Iowa. I'll share just a few slides too, but I'm going to keep this to maybe 3 or 4 minutes, just so that we can kind of keep moving here. just to confirm, hopefully you can see that. I'm Nick Moore at the University of Iowa. I direct the Emergency Medicine PSTP program here. I'm an emergency physician and critical care physician by training, and I have directed the PSTP program here and our National Physician Scientist Working Group in emergency medicine for the last several years. So we'll talk just briefly about what research in emergency medicine looks like. I think that probably most people are familiar with what the specialty of emergency medicine is, focused on the care of patients with time-sensitive acute undifferentiated illness. But that means that, similar to what Chaz was talking about in anesthesiology, the research opportunities in emergency medicine are also broad. Most people's practice environment is in either an emergency department or in one of the emergency medicine subspecialties, which is sometimes within emergency departments and sometimes it's outside. Emergency medicine has a number of subspecialties, and I list some of them here. Some are ACGME accredited, others are not, but all of these specialties have a component of research as part of the training programs. And many people who pursue specialties within emergency medicine have some kind of hybrid practice where they still may practice general emergency medicine for a portion of their career, and then they practice within a specialty. For people who are physician scientists within emergency medicine, though, many will devote their scientific or their research career within their subspecialty. Emergency medicine research is broad. We have basic science, translational work that's happening within emergency medicine, also a lot of clinical trials, and really even into the T4 translational research focused on community health. When we look at funders within emergency medicine, within NIH, this is really broad. That's something that's unique, not just to emergency medicine, but because there's not one Institute of Emergency Care Research, within NIH, there are people who are studying cardiac arrest and stroke, and who are studying drug addiction, aging, all within their emergency medicine practice. There are a number of different research-focused training pathways. What we have at the University of Iowa is a more traditional PSTP pathway. In emergency medicine, clinical residency can be 3 or 4 years, but what we have is a 5-year program that incorporates research training throughout. There are a number of other programs that either offer a clinical fellowship with some research training as part of that, or some kind of hybrid clinical and research fellowships. There are a number of different funding pathways, some of which are within departments of emergency medicine, and some are collaborative programs. So you may be embedded within a department of emergency medicine on a neuro-focused or a cardiac arrest-focused training paradigm. I list a number of residency programs that really have dedicated physician scientist training pathways, and there's a reference here that you can look at to learn more about those places. So I think that the people who who pursue careers as physician scientists are people who are pursuing a clinical career in emergency care broadly, but then who also are seeking to innovate at that interface of emergency care. So I'm going to stop there, and I will also put my email address in the chat, and I'd be happy to talk with anybody afterwards.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for sharing. We will go ahead and start with our first question. And I wanted to remind the attendees that you're also able to submit questions to the Q&A box down below. And so the first question that we have, and I will say that a couple folks can answer these questions, but you're not limited to how many questions you can answer. So the first question is, what strategies do you use to ensure your clinical work informs your research and vice versa?
I can start on that one. Nobody else wants to. So I actually was lucky when I finished my fellowship that I'm an endocrinologist by training, but my research was and the overlap between metabolic diseases like diabetes and obesity and how they impact cancer. And so when I finished fellowship and was starting to figure out what I was going to do as faculty, I was actually given the opportunity by my division chief to set up an endocrine clinic specifically for oncology patients. So that is actually my clinical focus, and it actually has great overlap with my research. So actually it very much informs the research. So tomorrow, on Friday mornings, I see patients, and it's all, as I said, oncology patients, but with endocrine problems. And then my research is the flip side of it. It's how this metabolic syndrome affects cancer. And so if you have the opportunity, you can be strategic about how you set up your clinical practice in order to have some sort of overlap with your research.
I go ahead. I can just offer kind of the flip side to this. I think that it's really ideal when you can have them, very aligned, as Dr. Gallagher kind of mentioned. For me, I stopped practicing a few years ago, but a generalist OBGYN for 20 years. But my research interests were in infectious diseases in pregnancy, some that you don't find in Washington State, like Zika virus. But Group B streptococcus, SARS-CoV-2, flu, many, many different ones, and immunotherapeutics. And so my research always felt quite a bit different than what my clinical practice was. And that was fine. When I was in the clinic, I was really in my kind of clinical happy place. So when I was in the lab, I was in my research happy place. And both of those places were fine and they were different. And so you can make it work as well, just as long as you're doing kind of what your heart says that you should do.
Great. Thank y'all. We did have somebody submit a question in the Q&A box. And so they asked, in terms of your home programs, can you speak a little bit more about the success of your trainees? What percentage of trainees are able to successfully win an R01 grant or are able to establish their own lab by the end of residency?
I'll
I think
start with
I'll
that.
probably talk a little about that, but I'm happy to answer a little bit. So I think it's also helpful to think about breaking it down into more steps. So how, generally most residents at the end of residency probably aren't going to have an R01 at the end of fellowship and be completely independent. But basically 100% of our residents can go onto a K or a K equivalent internally, the K to K rate. So being on an internal K to an external K is basically 100% at Vanderbilt, and the K to R rate for Vanderbilt pediatricians is about 70%, which we think is pretty good overall. But the main thing that's going to influence your success is time. So how is the department going to give you enough time, enough runway to get your airplane into the air? It's not really about how fast you get there. It's nice to get there fast, and that's comforting. But what's really nice is you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And maybe somebody else zoomed off, but you want to be assured that if you're not zooming right away, that there's a longer runway and enough investment in you, enough additional resources, enough additional time, enough more protection that you can have the career that you dream of. And that's really what we invest in at Vanderbilt, trying to understand where you are all along the way, and then trying to build a long enough runway for you personally, not the same runway for every candidate.
Thank you. Next question. So one of the pre-submitted questions was for those in a more procedural specialty, I have heard that some folks have a 50-50 split in terms of their time at the beginning of their faculty career. Is this true?
I can take that on. For most T32 training grants, which is a common mechanism by which early faculty are supported, the NIH has traditionally required them to spend 75% of their time in research and 25% in clinical practice. However, some of the surgical specialties and I believe interventional cardiology approached the NIH some years ago and felt that to be adequately trained in their specialties, those individuals really needed more clinical training and clinical time to continue to develop their skills. So there are some carve-outs for certain specialties where at least on T32 training grants, that's reduced to a 50-50 split. But traditionally, it's been more protected research time in both specialties.
I can add a little bit on just from experience within our program. we have a very diverse faculty in surgery. Most of the clinicians in the department who do research have 1 day a week for it in surgery. And this speaks to some of the challenges of the rigorous training program. We do have several clinician scientists who have 40% dedicated time and up to 50% dedicated time. But 75% is really out of the question. It just doesn't happen very frequently in surgery, in otolaryngology anyway. What's really important, and this kind of goes back to what Dan was saying, is your needs are going to be unique to you, and the critical point for establishing your effort is going to be when you're going through your job search and you're negotiating your package, right? And so every institution is going to be different. If you come in with a really strong track record of research and goals to, seek K award funding and then R award funding, I will tell you that most of the institutes that provide training and residency in otolaryngology are going to be very excited to talk to you. That workforce is shrinking in a lot of ways, and it's competitive. So be assertive when you are negotiating, and set yourself up for success. I think 2 days a week is really hard to get a K award going. See if you can get at least 50% effort. I'll end there.
And in OBGYN, that is true as well. And with specialties that have higher salaries, the amount that the chair is kind of forking over to subsidize you is huge. And even on a K award, they're still subsidizing you a great deal. And it's really more for prestige of the institution to continue their research program than they are ever going to get back from R01 is just really just pass through funds. So the ability of a department to sustain, physician scientists is dependent on how many there are. If there are a lot of them, then that's becomes financially more difficult. If it is a department that is pretty well off financially, then they can do more. But it's a big ask. And so going to departments where the chair already understands this helps, where they've got a history of this and a track record of this. So you're not the first one asking for a huge payout as you're still training to do research and you have a 50-50 chance of success. So so kind of thinking about that, thinking about the chair's experience with people on this kind of track is helpful.
Thanks everybody for sharing their thoughts. I see that Dr. Gallagher linked a article in the chat. For other folks, the question was, could you talk a little bit about the differences in a competitive application to a PSTP compared to a non-research focused residency in the same area of medicine? I didn't know if any other folks had thoughts on that as well.
I'll comment that looking at any applicant to the residency, most anesthesiology programs will be very focused on your performance in medical school, to some extent how you did on board exams and so forth. But first and foremost, like in most of medicine, residencies are going to want to attract the individuals who are going to be the very best clinicians. Over and above that, to be competitive for a PSTP program, usually a history of having done some research, ideally if there's been publications associated with that research, because all of these pathways are investing in you both mentorship, resources, and money. As Dr. Adams-Waldorf was describing, it's an incredible financial investment in you by departments to give you time to develop research careers. So they want to invest in people that have a very good chance of yielding becoming a physician scientist. And if you have a past history of passion for research and productivity in research, you're going to be much more competitive in a PTSP program.
Thank you. We did have another question in the Q&A box. This person wanted to know, what is the difference between a PSTP program compared to residencies that have dedicated research years?
That's a great question. There are some specialties, such as general surgery, as you alluded to, that have built-in research years. I believe neurosurgery is another example, but there are many specialties, including anesthesiology, that do not have required built-in years to the traditional residency. So it really becomes a specialty-specific answer depending upon whether those residency programs have already built in time, or whether research time is usually either allocated intermittently. So for example, in anesthesiology, our board allows up to 6 months of research during the 4-year residency program, but there's no requirement for research in our specialty as there are in a few other.
The other thing that could be different in some specialties, this answer could be very specialty specific, but in many specialties, part of the PSTP is some kind of preferred entrance into clinical fellowships in the same place, so that a longitudinal research experience can span through clinical residency training and also fellowship training that might be in an area of focus that you would have more long term. So that is probably more relevant with certain types of research where, taking a year off or 2 years off to fit all of your research experience into really a very focused year may not be as feasible. Some of these types of mentored relationships that span residency and what would otherwise be fellowship, that really fits in the framework of a PSTP in some specialties. And this can be kind of a specialty specific answer.
Just to riff off of that, like the commitment that programs make when they sort of have the PSTP label, also that can be really important to you as a candidate. So especially if you say you're an MD PhD, you're not a spring chicken anymore by the time you start in residency, and it may be really important to your life to think, oh, I'm going to be here for 6, 8, 10 years, as opposed to I'm in a program that's going to question whether I should be here as a fellow, and I'm going to maybe have to move in 3 years and then maybe move again in 3 more years, as opposed to a program where you're sort of co-developing a career together, which is often the intent underlying the PSTP, is to build you and build the career together through whatever sort of your needs are.
And maybe just one comment off that, although it's not required, many of our PSTP graduates, and I know that this is true in some other places too, after you've been someplace for 5, 6, 7 years, developing your mentorship team and developing your career, many people end up staying on the faculty too, because that becomes this longitudinal investment, not just from a training program, but also of you and developing your lab and your team and your collaborators in a place to be able to really innovate in your area of science.
I guess we're kind of the odd one out here that we don't have a PSTP program. We have, 15 months of dedicated research training for clinician, for surgeon scientists. And I would say that many MD PhDs who come in are really happy to have 1 year. You've had a lot of training, and they're excited to get engaged in otolaryngology more specifically, and they're okay with that finite time. We've found that MD PhDs within our program tend to succeed really well because they're also older, more mature, they have more organizational skills, they have more critical thinking skills. And so even in the short programs, I would say you can thrive and you can get a lot done. But a year is a short period of time to get a research project done. So I will admit that. It's easier for some types of projects than others. But We don't have extended fellowship as part of our programs. It's very discrete residency training, but I think a lot of the training elements are going to be very similar, including, you know, targeted education, mentored research, career development, grant writing skills, that sort of thing. So I hope that fills in some of the gaps.
Thank you. And I know we actually touched on this a little bit, but what systems are in place to ensure strong mentorship for trainees, both in the clinical training and then also research sides?
I'll just say that NIH does a really great job in ensuring that preceptors or your mentors who are, you know, approved for training in these are able to do that, that they have the mentoring experience, they have the resources and the time to dedicate to your training. You know, I think every program is going to be different, but I think probably most programs now afford candidates and trainees a lot of opportunity to seek the correct type of mentorship, the correct type of training they want to get. At the University of Washington, our interns have a whole year of looking for the right primary mentor, and we give them a lot of support through that. If they express an interest in a cross-disciplinary type of project, we help introduce them to people in other departments. So I think I don't think you need to worry necessarily about the quality of the mentorship, because I think a lot of these programs do a lot to vet mentors to make sure they're invested, they have a track record of successful mentorship. I think the question is, you know, how do you make contact with them? And I think most of these programs are also really well established to help you with that process.
You might also think about, as a candidate, the flip side, just a little bit, like the mentors are highly vetted and associated with the program, but they still might not be the right mentor for you. Like that relationship might not work out for you, or that person might move, or it's just not a good fit. So the thing you might talk about with programs is what happens, what do they do, what is their experience with dealing with a poor fit that looked like a great fit to everybody but turned out not to work, and is that going to completely derail your career, and how are they going to help you recover from that, and what tools are going to be available for that, so that that's not ending for you, because it's going to spend a fair amount of your time if that happens.
Good point.
And I would just add, I would think about it, you know, as a marriage, and, you know, probably everyone on this call has been in a lab and has had a mentor, and maybe you don't always agree, maybe, you know, it's not always the perfect fit that it was, you know, when you first chose that mentor. So I would invest as much time as you can in trying to vet that mentor, either behind the scenes with other colleagues, with past mentees, trying to get a sense of how they operate. Do they operate like you do? You know, if you are not a morning person, are they really a morning person? They expect to see you every day at, you know, 8:15 in the lab or whatever, and you don't like to get there until 10, you know, whatever it is. So, but I just invest a lot of time figuring that out on the front end.
I would agree with that. I'm just going to add one other thing, and I have told everybody who's interviewed with us this year to do this, but if you are looking at a specific institution, do not move institution for one person. You want to look at the depth. If you're interested in a specific area, you want to look at the depth of faculty in that area, not move because of one specific faculty person, because the danger is, like Daniel mentioned, is that somebody can actually, like a faculty member can move. So you can match in March, by July, that person could have moved to a different institution, and you don't want to be stuck then in a new institution where the person you thought you were going to work with is no longer there. So I would encourage people to kind of look at more the depth of expertise in a specific institution they're thinking of moving to, rather than moving somewhere for residency for one particular mentor.
All right. Our next question is about for those that have families or are thinking about starting families during this period, what support do programs generally have for those in PSTP programs? And is that any different than what support is given to residents, other residents that are in non-research tracks?
I think I can just say for internal medicine, so all of the benefits that are given to any of our categorical residents are the same as our PSTP residents. The only thing to be aware of is that if you come to internal medicine and you plan to do the ABIM research pathway, there is less room for maneuver as regards time that you can take out of those 2 years, because you're trying to do your internal medicine residency in 2 years rather than 3 years. So we do have flexibility. We can move people from a 2-year residency into a 3-year residency if they want to take extended time off or need to go on leave. And obviously we're very open to that if it's necessary. It just might mean that they're not able to complete residency in 2 years versus 3 years. But any other benefits that we have for the residency program is given to all residents, whatever track they're in.
Thank you. And then one of the submitted questions is, what type of structure does your program have in place for the transition to first faculty position? Is there support for fellows to transition to the tenure track? And are negotiations individualistic, or are there foundations established, such as pipelines, for fellows to get hired?
I think that the residency program that invests in you in a physician scientist training program like these will want to keep you, and continue to support you all the way through to R01 and independent funding. It looks good for their program. It supports their research pipeline. It helps to train additional mentees. It keeps up the publications and the presentations from their department. It's good for the overall culture. So there are lots of reasons that they want to keep you. If they lose you, that's not good for their department. They invested in you, they trained you, and so forth. But of course, everyone needs to go everywhere, right? That's just the way that it is. So a department where you go should really want to keep you. That should be their approach. If it's not, that to me is a red flag.
Yeah, I'll just add, in terms of support from either residency, fellowship into the early faculty years, we largely use the T32 training grant for that purpose. So you can be a clinical attending level faculty member while you're on the T32. So we use that time on the T32 to help the early faculty individuals have protected research time and continue to write for things such as external foundation grants, NIH KOA awards, and so forth. So our T32 is used very much as a bridge for those early faculty years.
I think the other thing that I would say, so for our graduates, it has been somewhat individual. And part of the reason for that, and Dan mentioned it, it's not a race. And once you're in your faculty role, your tenure clock has started. So our goal is that by the time you're through your PSTP, you're ready for a tenure track faculty position. And that's what the majority of our graduates have done. But a lot of this, both through the PSTP and also through those first few years on faculty, is giving you the time so that you're ready to make that transition.
All right, thank you. And this question is a little bit more specific to Dr. Adams-Waldorf. Do you think more programs will open up OBGYN PSTP programs, and what does the future of OBGYN PSTPs look like?
I would hope so, if I'm being hopeful, that more OBGYN programs would open that up. There are very, very few OBGYN physician scientists. The number of K08 and K23 awardees is no different today than it was in 2006, when I got my KO8, the numbers are almost exactly the same. So I can point to the plot of the 8 KO8 OBGYN awardees in 2006, and I know exactly that I was one of those dots. It's pretty sad that we're still at the same place. That's one of the reasons why I wrote the grant, because I just wanted to change it. I wanted to be a legacy, a part of my career that I helped to kind of move the needle on this one point. Lots of other programs have reached out to me and said, we are really interested. How did you do it? I'm like, I'll share my grant. But the problem is that you have to apply to a specific institute for the R38, for example. And if you do that, you have to pick an institute that's not NICHD because they don't really have enough money for it. And you have to know 50 colleagues in that area that you can ask if they would be a mentor, and they would provide a lot of information for you and kind of pull everything together. I'm an infectious disease immunology, immunotherapy person, so that worked out really well, that I could kind of cross that discipline and ask 50 of my colleagues to support me in this application. But for a lot of OBGYN departments, they don't have that person, or they could do it through NCI or something like that. It's just, you have to have kind of that person who's just the right fit, who's willing to do it and willing to kind of champion it, and has enough grant funding, because you don't get, as a program director, you get essentially nothing for this in terms of FTE support. So you have to have enough grant funding otherwise. So I don't know. I hope so. There are a lot of people that are inspired by it though, so that's good. So we can hope. But please just send me an email, and we're talking a lot to our applicants before they apply, during the application process. So we have many, many more touch points than just the initial application and then the interview of the finalists.
Thank you. One of the questions submitted to the Q&A box is there a way for residents to take the guaranteed 6 weeks paid paternal leave per ACGME and still do the fast track? They said, for example, making up those 6 weeks later. And so that question is a little bit more specific. If folks could talk about taking time off for any reason.
I think
I'll come-
oh, sorry, no, go.
I was just going to say, it's very common that individuals take time off, particularly for raising families and so forth. What usually impacts that are the ACGME requirements for your particular specialty, and how the ACGME requires a certain period of clinical training time for you to be considered successfully completing the residency and being able to sit for your specialty boards. The way that's usually handled is if the time away, for whatever reason, exceeds the allocated time within the ACGME requirements, people simply spend a little bit more time in residency to complete those extra months and so forth. So it's not uncommon that we'll have residents who have had several children during residency who may need to make up an extra 3 or 4 or 5 months at the end of their training to fulfill the ACGME requirements. So these are usually not program-specific requirements. These are usually requirements of accredited residencies that you fulfill the expected amount of clinical training.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's not up to the institution. It's up to either the ACGME or the board who's accrediting your training. So for the internal medicine program, if you were to do the ABIM research pathway, I believe the current guidelines are that you have to do 20 of 24 months with patient-facing care. So if we can have people do that with leave included, then obviously we will help people get through that pathway. But it's often a reason that people do extend the residency program, and it's not a negative. It's like you want to raise a family and take the time to do that. So we will work with you. It just might mean that you just can't get through a residency in 2 years, which is obviously a path, and we'll still help you get to where you want to go.
Thank you. A pre-submitted question was for research track residencies. Are they amenable to those that did social science research, or have they been more focused on translational or basic research?
speak for peds, and peds, we just love research. So there's all kinds of problems at all kinds of different levels. So we'd be happy to have you, and we can point to examples of people from the PSTP that have done very social science kind of oriented work. I have a young woman that graduated not that long ago who focused on interviews of women who had gotten a congenital cardiac diagnosis for their infants, then what they did after that infant was born and delivered to the NICU and how that affected decision making. We have very basic science projects. You have to be creative and think about where the funding and stuff's going to come from and how fellowships and things are going to be supported. But that's something you can think about strategically throughout the training period of the PSTP. So yeah, if you're committed to answering questions, we're committed to helping you.
Yeah, I would say in otolaryngology, we've had several projects addressing social work related questions such as decisional regret, access to healthcare, equity in healthcare, et cetera. So, by partnering with organizations like the public health or departments like public health or global health, these things are becoming more and more feasible and more popular. So I imagine all of us can envision residents and fellows who've been engaged in this sort of work. I think it's tricky if you need to do prospective research. That can always be difficult given time limitations or resource limitations. Sometimes enrolling subjects can be challenging, but certainly try to make it happen if you're interested in it.
I don't think that training programs are the either barrier or facilitator here, right? Research comes in all different flavors, and I think that probably most training programs are in the business of helping you achieve your scientific goals. And where there are big problems that affect human health, there is often a mechanism for funding. And I think that probably many of our training programs are probably not looking to drive what people are going to study, but rather looking to give people the tools that they need to be successful in their own scientific pursuits.
And one of our pre-submitted questions asks, what are the most common obstacles that PSTP trainees face, and how do programs help them overcome these challenges?
I would say that balance, being able to train within your specialty, to become an expert physician within your specialty, while also developing a research career, while also developing a personal life. I think the wellness and the life balance is something that many individuals have to discover on their own. Really, what is the right balance to keep all of those balls in an area of wellness. I think every program and every mentor will seek to work with you to make sure that you are excelling in all of those areas, that you are doing well on a personal level. But these are really individualized challenges, I think. But I think everybody on this panel who's had a career as a physician scientist has spent most of their careers balancing, not just during training, but balancing throughout their careers to make sure that they're doing the right mix of patient care as well as research, administrative work, and so forth. So I think that's a particular challenge for a PSTP compared to a traditional non-research oriented resident.
I think the other thing that I might say is that interests evolve. So it's a big ask for anybody when you're coming out of medical school, maybe out of an MD PhD program, to say, do you know what specialty you're interested in? And then do you know what subspecialty in some of our specialties you might be interested in? And what is it that you'd like to study? And let's come up with your mentor program or your mentor team like next week. And I think that what I've seen in my PSTP residents is that as they go through training, you know, sometimes they come into residency and think they want to be a toxicologist and they decide they want to be a critical care doctor, or they realize that they have a newfound love for pediatrics and that pediatric emergency medicine is the direction that they want to head, right? I see Dan's thumbs up there, right? But you know, I think that what programs, at least in the PSTP space, are doing is that they're making a commitment. And that commitment is that they're going to help you achieve your goals. And that may be a different pathway than where you started, but part of this process of exploration and finding your place in the world and figuring out what problems get you up in the morning means that sometimes you end up in a little different place than where you started. And gosh, of all the people who've come into my program, I'd say that probably half, or maybe even a little more than half, end up with interests that maybe they didn't realize the day that they started. But you know, you are looking for a place that can help you grow and can help you explore, and who have the resources where even if the very specific thing you think is your life's passion ends up not being that, you're still with a group of people that can help you achieve your goals.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We appreciate everybody's thoughts and also advice. I wanted to thank you guys all again for taking the time out to be here, both the panelists and also the attendees. I just want to say this recording will be available on our website, and that our next interactive session for current trainees will discuss navigating waitlists and choosing a program on February 27th. The link for registration is in the chat. And then for applicants, we also have a session coming up in March 27th, or sorry, for trainees again, we also have another session coming up in March 27th, discussing prep for step 2. And then also in May, on the 22nd, we have a webinar with the ASA's Foundation for Anesthesia Education and Research. All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.